This is Matthew, host of the Superhero Ethics Podcast, and I've got an ethical question for you. If I'm trying to help you not listen to ads, is it ethical for me to do an ad to help you do that? If you go to our website, theethicalpanda.com, and just click on the join button, for $5 a month, $55 a year, you get to hear all of our episodes without ads. Was I ethical in doing this? Let me know. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Superhero Ethics Podcast. We're also going to probably be putting this out on Marvel Movie Minute because it is myself and Pete Wright talking about a Thor movie. But we're not going to give you a review, although I will have some thoughts to say about it at the beginning. But the movie Thor 4, Thor Love and Justice, which we will get to at some point in the Marvel Movie Minute, many years from now. I'm signing my son up to a podcast on that already. But it raises one of the most fundamental philosophical and theological questions that's been asked for thousands of years. The question that's known as Theodicy, or the school of thought, philosophical thought stemming from that question, known as Theodicy. And we're going to talk about how the movie did or did not address that question, and how the comics address that question, and the question itself. And we're here, of course, with Pete Wright. Pete, how you doing today?
I'm still talking about Thor movies. I thought I was done, but you keep dragging me back in.
Well,
otherwise I'm great.
I have to say I was excited because I thought this was one of the actually quite better Thor movies. So we're gonna have a much better time, and because this all started because Pete was like, "No, it's a pretty bad movie," and I was like, "No, it's really good," and so I was excited to rewatch it. It's not very good.
Oh, I did not expect that. Oh, good. I'm excited.
I will say that I think it's a lot of fun. I did not have a bad time in the movie theater watching it. The way I feel like I don't think it's possible to watch more than 30 seconds of Thor the Dark World and not feel depressed for humanity. Mm-hmm. So it's not like The Room level bad the way Dark World is, but it's not. There's just so many things about it that make no sense, and I promise we'll get past this, but we just need to say this at the beginning. I've spent now so much of my life analyzing the development of this idiotic character Thor in the first and second movie. In this fourth movie, he's just back to exactly where he was at the start of the first movie, isn't he?
Yeah, he really is. This movie becomes almost a lampoon of the Thor that we thought we had learned. Yeah. It had some identity and agency, and he's just riddled. He's rendered a joke in this movie.
As far as I can tell, here's the character growth he has, because I do think there's one important piece of character growth that happens for him. For most of the movie, his soundtrack is from the Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction album. But the last final scene, the song is taken from Use Your Illusion 1, one of their next albums, the song November Rain. So I do think that is growth for him as a character, but I think that's about it. Am I right?
Certainly, chronologically, yes. Yeah. I think that's about what we get. Yeah.
There. So, okay, putting aside our thoughts on the movie itself, tell me about the God Butcher in the comics, because I know part of where this started was I was saying that I thought it was actually a really fun movie, with the big exception being that they ruined the Theodicy question. And you were kind of agreeing with me because you were talking about how well it was handled in the comics. So let's start there. Talk about who is the God Butcher in the comics, and how are these questions... And actually, let me back up a second, because a whole bunch of people are saying, wait, what? You've not told us what Theodicy is.
Yes,
I'll get into a longer definition of it later, but let me give the quick idea of it is, Theodicy starts from the idea of a monotheistic God. So already we're kind of outside of the realm of Thor and all of them, but fair enough. But the idea that if a God is all of the omnis, omnipresent, omnipotent, omnibenevolent, in other words, like all-knowing, all powerful, and all-loving, like a good God, why does evil or suffering exist in the world? Because theoretically, if God is omnipotent, then there shouldn't be suffering. And there have been debates and arguments and whole schools of theology to try to answer this question. The idea of that, well, God doesn't want us to suffer, but we have to suffer for 8 million different reasons is a part of it. The idea of, that God is not all-knowing, or that because we have human agency, God is not all-powerful. Like, there's so many different variations of it, but it all comes down to that. And I think that one of the best examples of it is in the novel The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky, one of my favorite novels ever. Well, I should say there's a novella in it called The Grand Inquisitor, because it's a book about these four brothers however many brothers telling stories to each other. I promise I'm getting to the point. The Grand Inquisitor is a novella that one of the brothers tells, where it's the idea of a Russian inquisitor who's kind of like the CIA, KGB agent. He has total power, and he arrests Jesus. And he shows Jesus a young girl dying of malnutrition and says, how can there be good? What possible goodness can you tell me that justifies the suffering of this innocent little girl? And it's a great question. And so that's kind of, and to me, that's exactly the same question that Gorr the God Butcher asks when he looks to his God and says, my little girl died while we prayed to you. How could that happen? Why would you allow that to happen? So now, with that context, let's talk about the comic book.
I love the question, and I love that in the film we do get the question set up early, like pre-credits early, right? If gods exist and have power, and they're aware of suffering, and they choose not to intervene, what moral claim do they have to worship and loyalty and obedience? And that question is specifically addressed by Gorr, pre-God Butcher, in the Oasis. In the comic, and this is, as these questions will always go, the comic has a lot more runway to play with these ideas, right? Because this was a longer run. But Gorr had a child. The child died. Gorr's grievance was, as in the film, set up to be systemic, right? It was not a personal grievance. It was systemic. And he encountered gods across all eras who were cruel and indifferent and self-indulgent. And his conclusion in the comics was not that God failed me, but that gods as a class are morally bankrupt.
Right.
Okay? Crucially, the comic lets Gorr win that argument for a long time, right? Gorr is a deeply threatening entity in the comic run. And Thor doesn't end up, Thor and Gorr, that's going to get old. Thor ends up not defeating him by effectively disproving Theodicy, right? He defeats him by outliving the question, by becoming eventually a god who suffers along with others, right? A god who is able and willing to suffer along with humanity. And this is exactly what we got at the end of the second Thor movie, The Dark World. We talked about this. Thor he renounced his need for the throne and became a god of the people, right? Right. That's the same lesson that Thor is going through in the wake of Gorr the God Butcher. And that is a turn from what we get in film Gorr. I will say, as an aside, as we talk about film Gorr and these questions, the word is there was much more gore in film Gorr than we got, and that the movie ends up being reasonably butchered as a result of tests. So,
I mean, for one thing, there's simply no other experience of any other gods, and which is disappointing because I think they perfectly set up the Theodicy question in this first one. And it's the idea is that he is a believer in a god called Rapu, who's a god of light. And he lives in this like desert planet, and he's a disciple of this god. And he's walking across this completely desolate, waterless wasteland, seeing in the far distance this oasis of trees, and carrying his daughter. And I thought that first scene was beautifully shot. And you kind of get, you know the daughter's dying, and then there's just a cut to him with clearly what is just a shallow grave where he's buried her in the ground. And then he gets to this oasis area, and he stumbles in, and he goes for the water, and he sees fruit, and he starts ravenously eating it. And then he's willing to stop himself eating because he realizes he's eating the fruit of Rapu. And just the devotion is there. And to me, there's a couple lines in there that really sum up all of this so well. he says, because he doesn't really understand why Rapu is not, why didn't Rapu do anything? And at first, his question isn't even, why didn't you save anything? And here it becomes very much a critique of specifically the, sorry, I'm going to throw some theological terms out there, but I'll make sure to explain them. Eschatological. There are some religions which are, and the Abrahamic monotheistic ones especially, with somewhat the exception of Judaism, are eschatological. And what that means is that they have the idea of an end times and that something will happen after that there will be some reward and that there will be some, the old idea of if you just endure your suffering on earth, then you will go to heaven and all the good things will happen and you will get your eternal reward. And there's all sorts of arguments about how true that actually should be to Christianity. And I'm definitely in the school of when people are making you suffer and then they're the ones who get the church to say, don't worry, your suffering is sacred. I want to question that a little bit.
Yeah, problematic.
But putting it aside, and that's very much what's set up here, because he doesn't say, at first he's not angry. He just says, Rapu, our faith has never wavered, so will we now have our eternal reward? And he keeps repeating the eternal reward, and that's when Rapu laughs at him and says, no, of course you're not going to have it.
Yeah, right. Right. And I think that's, as we move through the argument of the film, we see that ultimately Gorr's principal grievance has been reduced from the systemic challenge that he's been facing to one God, one moment, and one specific loss, right? And Omnipotent City confirms his thesis briefly. We do see other gods, and we see that they're all to some degree comedically incompetent and self-indulgent and all of those things. But ultimately, what we get out of Gorr is that he becomes a tragic extremist in the realm of the gods. He becomes this cautionary tale and this man who went too far, right? And that doesn't address the central premise of Gorr the God Butcher. It turns this philosophical accusation into a personal pathology. And I think that's the problematic part of the treatment of this very deep and rich discussion that happens in the comic and in the hands of filmmakers who are quite apt at making jokes.
Right.
And
and
there we
it's
are.
Fun. Have you seen the show Our Flag Means Death?
Yes.
I think that is some of Taika Waititi's most brilliant work. And it has a similarly irreverent feeling to it, but it manages to convey incredible depth at the same time. And I don't know if it's because it's a show, so it had more time, or because here he's working with other people's material and also has sort of things he has to do. But yeah, you're right. I think that balance is completely missed here.
Yeah. Right, because we don't ever stop to think about whether Gorr is right in the film, and in the comic we do. Instead, the film asks critically, is he emotionally regulated enough to be listened to?
Right. Well, especially because, and here's where my question also becomes for the comics, in the movie we add an additional force, which is the Necrosword, and which we've been told the Necrosword is able to kill gods. And he hears a voice calling him towards the oasis, and so he thinks that's Rapu. And we realize later it's the Necrosword calling him, saying and the voice says, "You have suffered, come to me." Mm-hmm. And we think what that means is you've suffered, but come to me, you'll have your eternal reward, you'll meet your daughter in heaven, all that kind of stuff. But of course what the sword is just saying is, no, you have suffered, and you suffered for this God who didn't deserve it. Pick up your sword and strike and kill this god. Mm-hmm. Is the Necrosword part of his journey in the comic books?
Yeah, it's different, but I think I can see how you might make the argument that the Necrosword is demonstrating what it does in the comics. It's one of those letter of the law, intent of the law questions, right? So the Necrosword is absolutely an ancient sentient weapon. It was technically forged from living shadow, went through many hands, but ultimately it's this manifestation of kind of anti-creation, everything in the darkness. You can kind of see how it's manifested on screen kind of lives up to that a little bit.
I mean, you're getting kind of close to some Thor the Dark World stuff, so I'm trying to block off that part of my memory. But
we're walking that plank. Let me tell you, we're right there. But the beef in the comics with the Necrosword is that it doesn't just enable Gorr's crusade, it amplifies his rage. It's like actively feeds and shapes and sustains his crusade. It is a character in and of itself, right? It is the cosmological counterforce to the gods. And in Gorr's hands, he becomes the ultimate manifestation of the sword's will. And so we get that it's an ethical amplifier. It's this corrupting agency. It also doesn't, in the comic, right? It doesn't erase responsibility from Gorr. Gorr is his own person with his own crusade, right. And the sword is just enabling him to do that. I don't think you get any of. I mean, you certainly don't get. They wash away any of the history of the Necrosword in Love and Thunder. It is primarily Gorr's just sort of tool to contaminate places where he goes hunting for gods.
Right. Yeah, because I think that's one of the things that was also frustrating in the movie is because it takes the agency away from him. And you're right, it makes it just this fanatical crusade instead of someone asking a very relevant question. And for me, granted, Rapu is not an immediate threat, and I generally am in favor of some kind of prevention of future harm than death penalty. Mm-hmm. But in terms of all the people who've been killed by heroes in the Marvel universe, if you ask me to list the people who I'm like, well, that character really shouldn't have killed that person, Rapu's not in the top 10. He's probably not in the top 50. He's awful. And I think in that moment, where Gorr is coming from, we're all totally on his side.
Yeah, right. What it's so it's so frustrating, and I totally agree with you. And I think this whole question of asking, it's the one big question that the movie doesn't ever ask is, are gods morally responsible for suffering? Never really addressed.
Right.
It shifts subtly to what happens when grief curdles into violence and becomes an advocacy movie about extremists. And it's kind of a safer question. It's a more sort of audience-friendly question. It's more culturally present of a question. And it allows, it allows the tone of the movie to interrupt and deflate and joke past all of the harder corners of this particular exploration.
No, I think that is so true. And I first just want to read one line from Rapu, just kind of further driving home that point, and then get to where you are. There's one more line in that Garden of Paradise kind of thing, where Gorr says, "We have suffered and we have starved. My daughter died in your name," which that phrase alone hits so hard. And Rapu's response is, "As well you should. Suffering for your gods is your only purpose." And to me, that hits so hard. Again, in this world of, there's goodness in suffering for our God or for our cause, or the martyrdom that is so often taught by religions.
Yeah, and look at let's go from there to Omnipotent City, and we see that, as principally demonstrated in Zeus, that he's vain and largely useless. The film never follows that through. The gods are fundamentally unserious characters, and humanity is serious in spite of it. Or, the beings, the worshipful beings, are serious in spite of the unseriousness of the gods. Never rectified.
Yeah. I will. You said humans, and then kind of backed off on that, and I'll say, in that, you're better than the movie, because Zeus at one point goes why do we care about humans? And my thought is yes, Zeus, you are from Earth, and some of these other gods are, but clearly not.
Look around, read the room, they're mostly not. Right.
Well, and so that's what I think gets into one of the first places where I think this movie is able to avoid the question of theodicy, as you said, avoid the hard places. But does so in a way that makes it, again, nonsensical. And so I'm curious how the comics address it, which is that as I said, theodicy comes into being as a question once you have a God that is claiming to be a single monotheistic God who is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good. Because, like, for all the great philosophy of the Greeks and the Romans, they didn't ask this question because no one in their right mind would have ever thought that Zeus was either A, all-powerful, or B, all-loving. And certainly no one thought that about the Norse gods, Thor or Loki. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of this movie, and yes, Rapu, I think, is from the perspective of Gorr, I can understand why it feels like what the movie is saying is that Rapu has made claims of omnipotence and omnipotence to Gorr and his people. Maybe it's through books or sacred prophets or burning bushes or whatever.
Sure, yeah.
But Gorr believed that about Rapu. But they're, because in part they are very careful to say they are not going close to anything like the monotheistic religions, really none of the earth religions. There's some point, funny, none of the earth religions they think we're going to get upset. There's pointing to some indigenous religious community ideas, yep. Quetzalcoatl and stuff like that, but we certainly don't see Krishna or Kali. There's a reference to the god of carpenters, which feels a sort of a little we're
bit
talking
on the nose.
About gods, Christian right. Look, we kind of checked off a box, but they and I think and I get why they do that. But what part of my first thought is, where's the theodicy with any of these gods? And so I'm wondering, when Gorr is going through all this, does he get to places like Asgard and have any moment of going, wait, no one actually expects you to be. You're not making the promise that all these other gods made and then refused and then didn't live up to.
Okay, this gets to a central, I think, failing in the Thor universe, really in the celestial universe of these comics, because gods, the comic books dealing with superheroes are always kind of looked side-eyed as a way for us to have conversations about gods without using the word God. And right. These are super-powered, incredible beings that have been stand-ins for discussions about right and wrong throughout our modern human history. And here we're running straight headlong into a very confusing place where superheroes we already know are gods, but we're also talking about gods that we can't really talk about because they exist in the same universe as superheroes.
Right.
And I think that's a place where the movie is just straight up tongue-tied.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And I think it's in part and I know Taika Waititi is incredibly irreverent.
Yes.
And I kind of wonder, if he made this as an indie film for $10,000 on his own, would this have been somewhat different? And I almost want to get really defensive of him, of maybe that's why it becomes so comedic, because he couldn't do what he wanted to do. I doubt that. No one for a minute is ever going to think you're going to make a Marvel Disney movie that's critiquing monotheism. But in some ways, it feels like, this is such the wrong avenue to ask that question. Because again, like you said, no one in this universe till now has treated the Asgardians like gods. It's, do you watch a lot of Star Trek, especially the original series?
Absolutely.
One thing that happens in that show all the time is they come across a people. They're always more primitive than the Federation, and there's a lot of colonial attitudes in that are super problematic, noble savage nonsense and stuff. But it's always there's just a dude, and that's the god. And sometimes it's a super powered being, but still a being with a consciousness and sentience and not omnipotence. Sometimes it's someone with a computer. Or an AI or whatever it is, but it's always and Gene Roddenberry was quite famously quite atheistic. And in this world, they haven't quite done that because again, they're saying, well, the religion of the Norse peoples of thousands of years ago are based on these kind of things. Ignoring the fact that there are still people today who practice the religion of Thor and Odin and Asatru and all that. But also being able to say that's not the real religion that we're dealing with here in the West of Christianity, and then also Judaism and Hinduism, Buddhism, and all that.
I think this is an interesting pivot. Just I'll take my own sidebar because I want to talk about Jane Foster in this movie because I think Jane Foster is sort of an antidote to what you're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. Jane Foster's arc. Jane has cancer now. And she's really struggling with it. And as a function of her treatment, she hears the whispering of the broken Mjolnir calling to her, and she goes to get it and becomes the mighty Thor. Which was a very famous run in the recent history of the comics, and here we have it played out. This is one of those where the comic happened, and then it felt like the movie happened right away, where we get that interpretation of the female Thor, the mighty Thor. But here's the deal with Jane's situation: she's terminally ill. She does not blame gods, a god, the gods, any gods. She chooses her meaning without any guarantees, right? Ethically, I think Jane represents a non-theistic answer to suffering that Gorr does represent, right? Not God will fix this, not God owes me something, but what am I going to do with the time I have? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pick up a hammer and I'm going to help people who need help. This is not in the defense of gods, but a relocation of meaning away from them. And I think that is the strongest argument against Theodicy that this movie has, and I find it quite compelling. And why does it feel like such an empty husk by the end of this movie when the post-credits sequence has her going to Valhalla? Matthew, I'm pulling my hair out.
She gets her eternal reward.
Right?
Which is ridiculous. And, I'm with you. And especially because she's the kind of person who often brings up another version of the Theodicy question, which is when, because she has this terrible cancer and she's still quite young. Yes. And one of the ways Theodicy can happen is when people say, like, look at, like, war and famine and racism and all these terrible people that get away with the terrible things they do, and they never seem to be punished. Another time it can happen, though, and especially you're right, like Jane, I imagine, would go through it, and it's not her family, her loved ones, is when things happen that don't seem like they're supposed to happen. People get cancer at the end of their lives, not in their 20s, their 30s, or however old she is at this point.
Certainly not when they're still capably contributing to the body of knowledge that is science, right? She's still useful.
Well, yeah, and there's a whole capitalist thing there.
Yeah.
And of course, the fact is people get cancer as kids all the time, in their 20s all the time, but it breaks our idea of, and I'm not saying this is a good thing, I'm saying this is how we kind of are psychologically, like, trained in the world to think. We have these ideas, you do good things will happen to you. If you go to school every day and you have good attendance and you are always good, then you should be getting the reward, and not that kid who sits in the back and throws spitballs, but all of a sudden the teacher cares about their, think how often in, like, the high school show, the antagonist is the girl who does, almost always a girl who does all of her homework on time and is pissed off that this troublemaker is all of a sudden getting all the teacher's attention. We never want to be sympathetic to her, but I kind of think we should be sometimes.
Yeah, right.
But it's that same thing of, it's a feeling of there's supposed to be rules. And in school especially, theoretically there are. Do well, do good things will happen to you. And with the assumption of do good, get good grades, go to the right school, get good grades, you'll go out and have a job. Mm-hmm. Look at all the people who are now saying, wait a minute, I went to this right college, I got the right major, I did the right things. Why is my life not happy? They're asking the Theodicy question. In their case, the God is this assumption of stay on the right path and you'll have good things happen. Pulling it back to Jane then, I think you're right. I think there's something really, but I think, and I don't know if Darcy would have been the right person to do it. Maybe you have someone else in her life, like her mom or someone, like bringing someone else. But having someone else who was just sitting there going, Jane, this shouldn't have happened to you. Why would this happen to you? But the problem is, if you do that, if you want to connect that to the Gorr the God Butcher question, that person has to be asking God why it's not happening. And that is not something that is allowed in the MCU.
No, it's not, even though explicitly she renders the question irrelevant by refusing to anchor any meaning to divine justice at all
Right.
until that last rug pull of a ridiculous ending. And I think that makes for a fascinating question. I think you're right. I don't know that Darcy would have been the right person to do that, but whither Ian the intern,
Right.
Matthew, whither Ian it could have been
Ian could have done it.
all
Well,
along.
especially I mean, one of the things that I think often sparks a lot of these questions, and has been often a source of great critique of religion through the ages, is when it feels like the letter versus the spirit. The letter is more of the law is more important than the spirit.
Yes.
And I can't remember his name, but do you remember the book Angela's Ashes that became so popular?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
There's a story in that book, and granted, a lot of these things are over exaggerated, but they're based in truth. Where the character talks about being a young kid in Ireland, Catholic Ireland, at a very repressive time, and he gets sick, but his mom insists he goes to church and takes communion, and then he has communion and he throws up. And one of his other family members gets really mad because he just threw up the body of Christ, in this very like literalistic thing. In the same, I couldn't help think about that as I'm listening to Thor say to Sif, "You won't go to Valhalla if you die of your wounds 10 hours after the battle. Your arm might.
Your
but
arm's
because
in
you
Valhalla."
didn't technically die in what kind of an idiot God cares about that kind of thing?
Yeah.
But yet,
Yeah.
in our own religions, that's absolutely the way we think about these things, So yeah, I never thought about Jane Foster in those terms, but I think you're completely right. And it further shows that I think the Taika Waititi and the people making this movie are either I don't think they fully understand the theodicy question, or at least they decided that they can't really discuss it in this movie.
Well, I think it's important to answer that question. We have to really look at Thor and the character's failure as a moral agent in this movie. And it starts in the first act of the movie when Thor is rendered a comic agent of action.
Right.
Who doesn't ever get to ask hard questions, right? Because the opening of this movie, I laughed. I had some joyful moments during some of the action scene, especially with the Guardians. That was fun and funny and frivolous, and it was full of all of the sort of physical humor that I've come to expect from Waititi and from this part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But as a result, every time Thor stepped up to say something meaningful to a group, he was a joke, right? Every time in this movie, whether he's talking to the residents of New Asgard or to the alien people rallying their support in the first fight or to wherever, he always fell short of words. He was not able to do that. That set him up to never being able to meaningfully respond to Gorr's accusation. Right? All he could do is be a god of action. He could only respond to methods, not premise. He could never say, "You're wrong about gods, and I'm going to prove why." All he could say is, "Don't hurt kids." Right? Like, that was it, which is true. But the original charge is completely unanswered, right? We never get anything besides Thor as a protector and a caretaker. But he's a god. He's set up as a god, and he doesn't get to be the moral defender of divinity. And he kind of could have been.
Instead, he defends children by turning them into child soldiers. And maybe that was the only way they could get away with it. But I remember the first time I watched this movie, by that point, I'd clocked out. I think in the theaters, I just wanted fun. And that is a
dopamine hit for sure.
That scene is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Watching it this time, as I'm trying to think about these issues, I'm like, these kids are all this is like straight to PTSD for all, post-traumatic stress disorder for all these kids. Like, line up the therapists at this fishing village, please. And I think, though, to bring it back to kind of the central questions we're talking about, because what you're saying about Thor, though, also lets me to ask the main question that I have, which is, as bad as he is, I feel like one of the fundamental reasons Thor is not guilty of Gorr's accusations. Who is Gorr to the Asgardians? We have never seen a single person anywhere in the MCU, think back to that scene at the beginning of Captain America, where where Red Skull, what's his actual name? Whatever, Red Skull.
Yeah.
Where he crashes into that Norwegian town to steal away the Tesseract. Not even they say, "Please, Thor, please, Odin, we pray to you, come rescue us."
Right.
Because that's not how people think. That's just not the mindset of even the people who practice that religion. And the Asgardians are not doing anything to want that. Rapu clearly is profiting from and is encouraging somehow the adoration of people like Gorr. And so again, I think Rapu is guilty of that. But to then say the Asgard, I don't think it's like, maybe even Loki wants to conquer Earth, but he never tries to go and say, "Hey, remember, I'm the god Loki. You humans should worship me as a god." He says, "I have an army, and so you should worship me." Like, is there any moment in which the Asgardians do anything to create people who would suffer the way Gorr does?
That's an interesting question, and I think it does. It might go back to the Dark World, where we have montage agents, where we see the Asgardians fighting across the 9 realms. Like, we don't see what hath they wrought, right, in the wake of their actions. We don't see what they're asking of the subservient recipients of their defense, which may be their territory, so to speak. It may be their astral or celestial region of worship that the Asgardians get to hold, like Rapu has over Gorr and his people. But it's never explicit.
Yeah, even then, though, to me, that feels more like the U.S. Army, where we come in and we liberate people from communism or whatever, and then expect them to buy all of our stuff and worship our flag. But that's not, avenging angels setting up prayers and devotion for thousands of years in the future.
Right. Which ends up being more of a, we don't know what sort of time horizon exists between the Asgardians are here liberating our peoples, and then when do we start to worship them? Does it take 1,000 years, right? How long did it take the native people to start worshiping the Enterprise when it came up out of their ocean in the second Abrams movie?
Well, and so I guess let me go back to the comics then, because I think in the movies it seems like, and my sense is that this is true in the comics as well, that Lee and Kirby and all of them have been very careful from the beginning to say, we are never claiming that these people are gods in any recognizable way like Gorr would recognize a god. We are saying that these are superpowered beings who interacted with people on Earth thousands of years ago, causing people to think that they were gods and creating, therefore, the Norse religions that then became supplanted by Christianity in the Middle Ages and all that kind of stuff, and still exist in some pockets here and there. But there's never, even in the comics, I don't think there's ever a time where Odin is going back to Norway or to Germany or anything like that to bring up people to worship Odin again, is he?
I don't. You've asked a question beyond the scope of my awareness. Not that I have read. I don't know.
And you've read pretty, if it never comes up during the Gorr. So I guess in the Gorr the God Butcher comic run, does Thor ever make that defense of himself? Does he ever say, look, I never claimed to be benevolent. I never claimed that. I've never made the kind of promises to a people that Rapu made that that Gorr you are so upset about.
Well, Thor's arc is different, right, when we look at Thor in the comics, because Thor's arc is as a god who learns to care, right? He repeatedly in this journey is confronting gods who are cruel and indifferent and self-serving, right? He is seeing the same thing that Gorr is seeing, and his arc is not about becoming stronger, but about becoming worthy of belief himself. Right. So that does sort of answer your question, right? It's that Thor, even if he doesn't explicitly say, I want you all to believe in me, he is saying that he wants to be worthy of it just in case. Right.
But even then, it's worthy of being believed in as a leader, not as a god.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Because even I haven't read much of this, but there's a whole line, the old King Thor line, where it's really defined much less about conquest and Odin's legacy than it is about just stewardship and memory
Right.
and legacy and being responsible for what survives after gods fail.
Right.
And so, I mean, all of that is really rich territory, and the movie compresses that multi-era arc into this single symbolic gesture
Right.
and joke.
So let me put it this way. Let's say, I'm trying to think how this would even work. You maybe would have to have some time travel shenanigans, but I guess in the MCU that's totally possible.
Right.
Gorr comes into contact, maybe in the shadow ghost world or whatever, with the crew of an old Viking ship. And it's a Viking ship that, during a terrible storm, did all the things you're supposed to do to ask Thor, the god of thunder, not to, to take the storm away. We've made a sacrifice to you. We've sung the right songs. We've done the right chants. And yet still the thunder came, the lightning came, our ship sank in this terrible storm. And now these are the restless dead. And Gorr somehow finds them and sort of brings them to Thor and uses that to be part of the accusation against Thor.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to do that very well for it not to become like a Pirates of the Caribbean movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't trust Waititi at this point to do it.
Yeah.
But do you think a scene like that would have helped to put Thor a little bit more like accurately in Gorr's crosshairs, or at least to bring up this question a little more?
Oh, yeah. But, I mean, I think even more broadly, I think scenes like that would help establish the relationship of the gods
Right.
as distinct from the superheroes and regular old, worshipers.
Right.
And we've never had that. And maybe you're defining part of the challenge of this movie, which is we have never had a table setting conversation around the fact that there are individuals who believe in these gods.
Right.
In a way that is religious at all. Everything has been, I follow Superman because Superman can fly and save me from trains.
Yeah, and in that regard, I mean, you could almost see it turning into and I wouldn't want it to go this exact direction, but some kind of a version of a Prime Directive conversation of, hey, wait a minute, I think Star Trek would look and say, oh, Odin and Thor and all of you violated the Prime Directive. You used your superpowers in the Norse lands thousands of years ago, and now they built a religion around you.
Yes.
And yeah, that could have been an interesting direction of sort of like, what are you going to do about that now? But again, it's hard because there's not really anybody who still worships. I mean, there are small groups, but most of them don't think he can actually stop a storm.
Exactly. So the movie ends with a new sort of dynamic duo presentation, right? Love and Thunder, and Love is the resurrected daughter of Gorr. This is an entirely cinematic revelation. But I am curious your take on the final message, right? If we're looking for a sort of, I don't know, the comic doesn't give us a clean moral victory, right? We get a bigger question, which is what kind of God is worth believing in? That's
right.
the ultimate message. And the film's answer seems to me to be more akin to a God who chooses to love someone or something smaller than his or herself.
See, and I would disagree because I think that to say that implies that Thor is in any way claiming godhood. I think the question the movie is asking is, what does a hero have to do to be worthy of being believed in? Because I think Thor is at this point so thoroughly rejected any idea of godhood
as a
all of his
god.
people.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
As to the idea of, do you deserve to be worshipped as a god because you were willing to love and protect a small child? Well, as someone who's recently chosen to love and protect a small child, if people want to worship me as a god, I would not complain. I certainly think that the sacrifices I make are of an epic standard, something no other father has ever done. But the reality is, no, that's not the case. And I will say that watching this, having had my child born, when I watched this originally before even we were pregnant, does change my perspective somewhat.
Yeah.
But again, I was struck by, okay, you have this adorable little girl who didn't really have any, if she had been a character all along, I somehow forgot. I think I remembered the movie ends with Love and Thunder, but I kept waiting for him to bond with one of the small girls who was kidnapped by Gorr and build a relationship that way. And the idea that, no, it's actually just that Gorr resurrected his daughter with his one wish, which, by the way, if it's just take the Bifrost to a place to make one wish to change the whole universe, how has no one done it before? That's a huge plot hole. God, all that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
But, yeah, the idea that he just resurrects her out of nowhere and says to Thor, who I guess has seen this kind of moment of sacrifice from, but, he just still doesn't know from Adam, sure, why don't you take care of her? Thor agrees to. That's a good thing for him to do. And then trains her to go into battle with him.
Yeah.
Which, again, child soldiers are bad. Whether it's Padawans, whether it's young gods, and here's the last thing I'll say. When this movie came out, I think was still pretty early on in the post-Endgame part of the MCU, where I think a lot of us were still really hopeful about what was going to come next. And
Indeed.
so this was also when I think Young Avengers looked like it was a real possibility that was going to happen. And so when I was like, oh, okay, well, I know nothing about this girl, but she looks fun, and like putting her alongside some of the other young people we're getting introduced to for Young Avengers, that seems cool. But none of that's happened.
None of that's happened. No.
And I think without that promise of something coming in, and again, also Hercules gets introduced. Whatever happened to him?
Oh, yeah. Oh, he was busy with Ted Lasso. I think that the comics always let Theodicy remain unresolved and lives with discomfort. And the film absolutely does not. We end on a child. We end on a bedtime story framing. We end on a named abstraction, love, right? Now the movie has reframed all of the evil in this movie has been reframed as a parenting problem, not a cosmic one. And that is a deliberate narrowing of the scope of the film. So we're no longer going to ask, are gods morally justified, which we explicitly opened the movie with.
Right.
And instead we're going to end on, what are you going to do with your power tomorrow morning? We're going to have some cereal. We're going to open the door and we're going to go fight for good. It's consoling, right? But it absolutely sidesteps from the original accusation. And I think that is fundamentally the problem that I have with this movie. And I think it goes back to, why when you presented this as a potential conversation, why I react strongly, because this movie is a colorful lampoon of a rich opportunity for exploration and explanation of some characters in the universe that just misses the mark.
Yeah. No, I think so.
I have one more question for you.
Sure.
Is it better than The Dark World?
You're kidding, right?
Kinda. In my rewatch, it is better than The Dark World. This is a classic example of like a 3-star movie on Letterboxd, but no heart. Like, I don't need to watch it again, but I got what I needed to get out of it. And there was a lot of color and pixels on screen that made me smile and laugh. But fundamentally, it's not a good movie.
Is eating a slice of not great pizza better than your worst ex punching you in the face and then taking a shit on you? Yes, that's an easy question. Thor the Dark World. Do you remember how angry I was about that movie?
You were very angry.
I
regret the question.
This movie's fine. Like, I think to me it's like it's probably, I think, so on the Star Wars podcast that I also run, Star Wars Generations, check it out, very worthwhile.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
I've often talked about how I think when you look at a movie in a series, Attack of the Clones and Rise of Skywalker and how people feel about them, to me, says a lot about what you're looking for from a series. Because I think that Attack of the Clones is an objectively awful movie. Bad directing, bad writing, awful acting. Like, all the technical things that go into making a movie are just badly done. but that if you want to understand the overall Skywalker saga, it's a very important chapter and it fits into it quite well. The Rise of Skywalker, I think, is a very well-made movie. This dialogue is snappy, the action scenes are great, the characters are fun, but it does active violence to the story of Star Wars and completely destroys all the good stuff Last Jedi had set up. And to me, I think that's kind of like with this. Like, this is, I'm mad at this movie because I love Theodicy and I want to get, but I think that if Gorr the God Butcher had been Gorr the Ox Butcher or Gorr the Goat Butcher, and the whole movie was keeping Gorr away from the screaming goats.
So many goats.
I would have said, you know what? I paid my money to eat my popcorn and watch Pixels and laugh, and I got my money's worth. And is it going to be high on my list? Was it one of the movies I might skip when I rewatch the MCU? Probably, because I don't think it holds up much on a second or third watch. But no, it was a fine movie that had the premise to do something good and failed at that.
Yeah.
I think it is. I think comparing it to Thor: The Dark World, I think is not a. I think the real comparison is between this and the first movie, because I think that's where we get into the Rise of Skywalker versus Attack of the Clones. Because to me, Thor: The Dark World is a movie that does a lot to set up some fundamental questions, and watching it really helps you understand the growth of this character and the growth of the universe and the growth of Loki. But it's still a pretty shitty movie.
Mm-hmm. Fair.
Whereas this is a fine movie. It just doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
What about for you? How would you rank those two?
Well, I definitely think that, I'm Thor 1 all day.
Really?
And yeah, but compared to this one, because I think I think I get so...
Do you remember the big robot in Arizona? That was pretty terrible.
I don't know. I like so much of what it represents in terms of earning our wizards later. And yet this movie, I think my problem with this movie is one that I cannot easily separate from my experience with Ragnarok, which I thought took all of the humor that Taika Waititi is so capable of and actually made a movie that balanced this new identity for Thor and the responsibility of the character to the world around and relationship with family and sibling and chosen family. And there was just a lot going on in that movie that was really balanced with tone. This movie is so all over the place with tone and comic nonsense that I really struggle with it. So I think I actually prefer the Shakespearean Thor, that we get in the first movie. I think, to me, I'd rather sit through that than the off-the-rails version of Love and Thunder.
Yeah, that's fair. Whereas to
Even
me,
the robot.
That one is very much, it's not as bad as Attack of the Clones, but it's in that same world of, I'm really glad it exists. I'm really glad I saw it so I can understand. And I feel like I'm going back to it all the time. I don't want to see it again, though. It's pretty bad. But
right. So
I thought what you were going to ask me is what I will ask you is our sort of a nice light question to close things out. How do you answer the question of Theodicy? Why is there suffering in the world?
No, I'm Jane Foster all day long.
Nice light question.
What suffering is our lot in life. It's not a lot, but it's a life. I don't myself suffer with the ethical questions of misery. And eschatological fairness. To me, it's we deal with what's in front of us.
Yeah. Well, and just to tie this all together, I think this is going to be a fun topic if we should bring up some time on the parenting podcast, because for me, I'll save a whole other theological idea here, but I am very much Theodicy rests on an assumption of God's omnipotence, which I think even the Bible specifically argues against. And so I think I'm very happy being a Christian and saying this question doesn't matter. And the way I'm going to bring it back to the Theodicy part is that to the parenting part is, and there's a great rabbi who I studied with who passed away a couple of years ago. I can't remember their name, but he kind of put forward this idea of, if you look at the books of the Hebrew Bible, like, it starts with God being completely all powerful and saying, do this, do that, you get punished. And then later it's more stepping, and it's a God who steps back further and further and further till the final books of the Bible where God doesn't even appear. And the people suffer and they say, God, why aren't you here? And the metaphor he drew is to that's somewhat like parenting, that when, and there are moments when, and maybe this is me overthinking parenting, but when my child is recently getting over now, but had 2 ear infections, and when my child would scream in pain, like, it doesn't have a philosophical conception, but like, it knows that I'm the one who brings it food. I'm the one who, when it's warm, I do this. When its diaper doesn't feel good, I'm the one who fixes it. When something is wrong, I fix it. And in that moment, something is wrong, and I couldn't fix it. And my baby was mad. Yeah. And I definitely remember being, I think I told the story somewhere else of like when it rained on a day that my birthday was supposed to go to a Met game. And I was so mad. And I was like 6 or 7, and I don't think I technically was like, Mom, why did you let it rain? But it was probably some level of like, why didn't you check? Why didn't you make sure? How could you let this happen to me? And to me, the answer to the question, there isn't an answer, but to my understanding of the question of theodicy is kind of what you said at the beginning of that Thor sort of gets to, but I didn't quite know what you meant there. But like that the idea of that at times the best things we can say as parents and as therapists and as counselors and from my understanding, the divine, is not you suffered because you earned it, but you suffered because it's random, but you're not alone in your suffering.
Yes. And boy, that I think you're exactly right. I don't think Thor: Love and Thunder purports to fully address that question.
Yeah. It sidesteps all of theodicy.
Yeah.
And
all right.
Fair enough. Well, thank you so much, Pete. Any last things you want to say on this?
No, honored to have been here. I appreciate the conversation. It was not it's not usually the kind of movie conversation that I get to have, and so I'm thrilled to be able to be a part of it.
Well, good. I'm good. I like getting to think about these things in new and different ways. So it's a lot of fun, and you're someone I knew would be a fun person to talk to about it. So, listeners, what do you think? We raised some pretty deep questions here. Would love to hear your thoughts. All the ways to contact us. They're all in the show notes. Please check out my other podcasts. Pete, tell us one fun thing you've done on another podcast recently that you want people to know about.
I'll tell you what, if you are interested in thinking about the ideas that underscore human legacy and the footprint we leave behind us when we're gone, I invite you to check out my new show, Headstone, with Pete Wright. I am very proud of it. I love the kinds of conversations I've been getting to have. And I hope you learn something about your own legacy as a result of listening to the trials of others.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll check that out. It's called Headstone, Tombstone?
Headstone with Pete Wright.
All right. We'll definitely check it out. Thanks so much, Pete. Thanks so much, everybody. We have spoken.